Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Canada's Caregiver Program, Expectations and Questions for the Future. Today, we are joined by our panelists, Hilete Stein and MacLean, who will provide us with the anticipated requirements and next steps of the Caregiver Pilot Program. Please feel free to ask any questions via the questions icon at the top of your screen. We will do our best to address them at the end, but if the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided on the screen currently. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to Hilete and Claire.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So Claire and I are going to be speaking today about Canada's caregiver programs. And, as we all know, these programs tend to work in pilots, which last for typically periods of about 5 years, sometimes less. And when we're talking about the programs, we're sort of in a transition period right now. So we wanted to kind of start off by looking at, what has the government told us about our immigration levels and what we can, expect, sort of how they're thinking, which will inform us on what we can expect moving forward. So Claire, did you want to maybe give us some insight on the immigration levels plan, and where do caregivers fit into this plan that we're seeing?
Yeah, sure. So over kind of a 3-year forward-looking period, Canada usually gives us a little bit of an expectation about how many permanent residents will be admitted under each program annually. That is not set in stone, but generally the targets are pretty accurate. So for 2024 through to 2026, Canada has indicated that about 15,000 permanent residents will be admitted under the caregiver programs. We know that as of April 30th of this year, nearly 57,000, so almost 6,000 caregivers had become permanent residents through the previous pilot programs, which were launched in 2019 and closed earlier in June of this year. So with those numbers, we can kind of expect the remaining spots for 2024 to be filled by the backlog of the previous caregiver programs. We're not sure how those numbers will play out in 2025 or 2026, but generally the immigration caregiver programs do have annual quotas as well. So we expect those to also play into that 15,000 target over the next 3 years.
Right. So, I mean, when we're looking at the previous program, obviously, we were seeing some backlogs, which we'll get to a little bit later on today. And, we do still have, obviously, an inventory that the government is processing towards, these numbers that they're looking to achieve. And we've actually seen some recent changes that are interesting and kind of speak towards this effort to process some of that backlog. And so we wanted to take a few minutes to just look back at the previous pilot program and some of the changes that are happening there before we get into kind of what to expect moving forward. So in June 17th, the previous home child care provider and home support worker pilots closed. They ended. No new applications are going to be accepted for processing under these pilots. However, we did have an announcement last week where changes to the eligibility criteria of that program were announced. And these were pretty interesting because what the changes say is that effective June 16th of this year, if you applied under the previous pilot program, they have reduced the work experience requirement to qualify for permanent residence from 12 months to 6 months. And not only that, experience gained outside of Canada is also now eligible. So it looks like some changes are being made to sort of speed up some of that backlog of individuals who may have applied under the gaining experience category. These individuals can also now submit work experience gained in the 36 months before submitting their PR application. And they obviously still have that 36 months to submit proof of work experience after the work permit is issued. So people who may have been kind of between that 6 to 12 month work experience situation where, you know, they were still going to have to wait another 6 months to provide proof of their work experience can now actually submit their proof to IRCC if they meet the new qualifying experience criteria. The caveat to that is that these individuals would need to have their e-application number in order to submit proof of the work experience. So if you only have that X application number, you still have to wait to receive the e-number from IRCC. So that's really an interesting change that we've seen, and it's almost you know, sort of trending in the direction of what we're seeing or expecting the criteria under the new pilot to be. Claire, you know, we've been seeing some of these processing times really well above what the pilot you know, had initially intended, where I think initially they were talking about 12 months, correct? Processing time?
That's right. So when they launched in, I think 2019, we were expecting, you know, things to kind of happen within 12 months. And within those 12 months, we kind of realized that that was not going to be the case. So as of now, we are able to form some expectations about the processing time. Immigration has published timelines for the permanent residence portions. Again, these are just guidelines. They're the average timelines. Sometimes we're seeing these being exceeded a little bit. And basically for those who have the work experience that was required when they filed, processing times are a little bit shorter. So under the home child care program, for people who applied directly for permanent residence, they already had that work experience. Processing time is about 26 months. For those who didn't have the work experience and applied basically under the gaining experience category, processing time is a little bit longer at 36 months. Under the home support worker pilot, we're seeing overall around 31 months. And keeping in mind that that is for the permanent residence portion. So people who applied for under the programs for the initial open work permit to come to Canada and get that work experience, number one, they should look at, do they qualify to make those updates that Hilete mentioned before? Number two, I guess we're still looking at having the open work permit, coming to Canada and gaining that work experience. And, you know, I would say what we're seeing is anywhere from, you know, 2 years onwards for that initial open work permit. Now, we do expect some changes there, as it looks like immigration is hustling to kind of get these processing times down in anticipation of the new program's launch. And one of the things that the immigration minister did acknowledge when announcing these new pilots was the backlog that's been created under the previous pilot. So immigration knows that this is an issue. They were very transparent and wanting to ensure equitable treatment between, you know, past applicants and those who may be applying in the future. So they are looking at these numbers. They are trying to get applications through. We just don't have, you know, very specific expectations other than what immigration has kind of processed as the average timelines. And I mean, looking forward, it will be interesting to see how the new program launch addresses these historical backlogs.
Yeah, you know, as I said, you know, these new changes really are sort of looking like it's an effort to deal with some of the backlog. You know, typically as well, you mentioned, you know, the importance of updating the application if you do meet these new criteria. You know, a lot of times we see situations where an application may just be sitting, we're not hearing much, and then we do put in an update, and suddenly things start to move and we see it sort of processing. So if you do meet those new criteria, definitely put in proof of your work experience. And if you don't, let's look forward to you know, the new pilot and what we can expect, because the new pilot also has some enhancements that we didn't see previously. So, one of the biggest ones that we're seeing under this new pilot is that home care workers will be getting PR immediately on arrival in Canada. So it's a one-step immigration process where, unlike in the previous program, you don't need to apply to get a work permit first to gain the Canadian experience. It's a direct to PR pathway. And PR, offers more autonomy, opportunity to advance in the care sector. It mitigates, precarious scenarios where candidates might become beholden to a single employer. So, where we did have the open work permit previously where candidates could work, as a caregiver for any employer, this direct to PR pathway provides a little bit more autonomy to the applicants. And obviously, like with the previous program, dependent family members will likely be able to be included on the application, really keeping in the goal with keeping families united throughout their immigration journey. We've also seen some relaxation of the criteria under the new caregiver pilot. So Claire, did you want to take us through what those application criteria are that we know of? Because right now it's sort of in an announcement phase, and we don't know exactly how this will play out. There are still some unknowns.
Yeah, so immigration has given us a little bit of information about what we can anticipate. Number one, we know that there will be a language requirement that applicants score at least CLB4 in each language category on an immigration approved language test. So the previous program required language abilities of 5 in each category. And what this really meant was that certain caregivers who were here working successfully in their professions just weren't able to meet that score in certain categories, and it was disqualifying them under the program, really not leaving them with many options. So immigration heard that, they recognized it, and they've dropped it down to 4. Now, immigration requires candidates to demonstrate these language abilities through an approved English language test or a French language test. There are 3 designated testing organizations as of today for English and 2 for French language. So we want to see a score of 4 in each language category. We're not looking at the overall score. In terms of education, again, immigration has dropped it down a little bit. We were looking at a requirement to have a post-secondary diploma credential of at least 1 year. Now we're looking at candidates requiring the equivalent of a secondary school diploma. So that generally equates to high school in Canada, a lower threshold than was previously required. And again, candidates need to demonstrate their foreign credentials through what's called an education credential assessment report. Can be done by a number of immigration approved organizations. So candidates should make sure that we call it an ECA report, shows the Canadian equivalent level of their education to be at least a secondary school diploma. The final piece of information immigration gave about the applicant criteria under this program is that they need to have recent and relevant work experience. Now, similar to the previous program, that is really not defined by any strict measures. It kind of remains to be seen, what does immigration consider recent and what will they consider relevant? We do anticipate that they may provide a little bit more guidance on that once the program launches. But, as of today, we know relevant generally requires you to have the skills to provide the care services in Canada. Recent remains to be seen. So that's what we know about the applicant criteria as of today. Immigration has also given a little bit of an idea about what the job offer and what the employer criteria will need to look like under this program moving forward.
Right, and with the job offer criteria, there's also been some changes which are different from the previous program. So under the current or the future pilot, um, caregivers will be allowed to have a job offer from an organization that provides temporary or part-time care to people who are semi-independent or recovering from injury or illness. And this can also be for not-for-profit organizations. So in the past, we were seeing typically, offers for private households to work in a private household, and now we are also able to include organizations that will provide temporary in-home care to individuals that require it. Like in the previous programs, the job offer does have to be for a full-time home care position. Likely you will still need to show that the salary being offered to you will allow you to support yourself and your family members in Canada. And the employer may be asked to provide proof of an ongoing offer throughout the processing time of the application. And this is something that often, we find applicants don't think about at the outset. So they think, great, I've got a job offer, and I meet all the other criteria and I'm going to put in my application. We have seen immigration coming back often, 2.5 years down the road, and asking applicants to provide proof that that job offer is still open to them, because that is one of the main criteria of the program. And with the lengthy processing times, immigration wants to make sure that what was offered maybe 2 years ago is still open to you at the time that your application is getting processed. So that's something that applicants need to discuss with their prospective employers and be realistic about the processing time, to ensure that this will remain open to them throughout the processing of the application. We have seen in the past situations where an applicant may end up with a job offer from a different employer than the one that started the process for them, and that switches during processing. In particular with private households, if it's a childcare position, maybe the child is getting older and the needs are changing. Working with elderly people, sometimes we see situations, unfortunately, where the prospective employer passes away during the processing of the application. So it's something to think about at the start. How am I going to ensure that this job offer does remain open to me, or that if something does change, I can potentially get a job offer from a different employer during the processing of the application. And for prospective employers as well, it's important to consider the processing time and be realistic in terms of when this individual may actually be able to arrive in Canada and begin working for you. There, as Claire mentioned as well, there are still a number of unknowns about the program. We don't know the meaning of recent and relevant work experience yet, but we would typically say at this point, if you're thinking whether this program might be something for you, recent we look at typically within the last couple of years, probably no longer than 10 years and maybe sooner than that. And relevant would be some experience that will give you the skills that you would need to fill the position being offered to you in Canada. So, if you're coming to work in, childcare, and you've never worked with children before, then, you probably don't have the relevant experience. Okay. Another question in terms of the intake process. So we don't know what this system will look like when it does open for the new pilot programs. In the past, we have seen a first come, first serve system. There are other programs where we have seen a lottery system where you would put in, sort of an expression of interest and wait for an invitation. We haven't seen that previously with the caregiver programs, but nothing has been announced in terms of the process and how intake will work yet. So that remains to be seen. In terms of quota allocation, we mentioned before. So IRCC has confirmed that this program will be quota based, but what that annual quota will be, we don't know. And we don't know whether that quota will be divided between childcare versus support workers, or whether it would be sort of just a general caregiver program quota. We spoke a little bit about processing times. What do you think, Claire? Are the processes going to improve, or are we going to still be seeing these 2 to 3 year processing times that we have been experiencing?
I mean, I'm always optimistic with a new program launch. One of the things that immigration did stress in their announcement about this program is, they know that the delays have caused hardship for Canadians, and they've also caused hardship for the people that are waiting for their applications to process. And I think in kind of bringing this down from a 2-step to a 1-step direct to permanent residence process, immigration is kind of signaling their commitment to making processing as streamlined as possible. The past programs took us through COVID, and that kind of changed our expectations from immigration across the board. So
Right.
I do think that processing under these future pilots ideally is going to be a little bit quicker, allow us to kind of respond to the domestic need for caregivers in a more realistic way.
Right. And IRCC also stressed fairness, right? And we don't know when the new launch date of the program is going to be. So hopefully there is going to be some thought there in terms of prioritizing the backlog under the previous programs and determining when to launch the new program, so that we don't end up with these lengthy processing times again.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things again that the immigration minister really stressed in his announcement is we want to make sure that everyone is treated equitably under these programs. So, in kind of reading between the lines there, we think that immigration is going to focus on clearing that backlog, launching these programs in late 2024 or early 2025. And hopefully before then, providing a little bit more information about what exactly prospective applicants and prospective employers can expect under the new pilots. So with that, we kind of know a little bit about what to expect. So how do you best prepare with this limited information to file an application once the program's released? We kind of alluded to the language test requirements. Language tests are generally valid for 2 years. So with a program launch date, even in early 2025, it would not be premature to start looking at the language testing agencies, perhaps writing your first test, seeing how you fare. It does give us enough time to do a rewrite usually if the test results aren't up to that CLB4 requirement.
Right,
also
and we can, Claire, we can write the language test as many times as we want. So, if you're not sure whether you'll be able to meet those minimum results across all 4 categories, starting to book your test now is a good idea, and it gives you time to rewrite if you need to.
Yeah, immigration is never averaging those results. Similarly, is getting your foreign education assessed. We need the equivalent of a Canadian high school diploma. Sometimes it can take a while for those documents to come from your institution to the assessing organization. The assessment reports are generally valid for 5 years. So again, not premature to start getting those applications in with those assessing organizations, having the results and having the certainty that your education is met under the program now.
And just, we sometimes get questions with both the educational assessment and the language test saying, oh, well, if my results are only 2 years and 5 years and processing times go longer, am I going to have to redo it? No. Once you submit your application, your results are locked in. So there is not a need, if for whatever reason, processing takes 3 years and you wrote your language test, in, let's say, September of this year, it doesn't matter. As long as you submit your application within the 2 years of the language test validity or within the 5 years of the educational credential validity, that will be locked into your application at the time of submission.
And kind of further to that, just getting your documents ready. So collecting your proof of relevant work experience. In the past, we've seen requirements for things like employer reference letters, pay statements, tax documents. Sometimes immigration will want to see employment contracts. That type of document can take a while to dig up. So not too early to start getting those. Similarly, civil status documents, official birth certificates, making sure that, if you have children, that their birth certificates list both of their parents, marriage certificates, making sure your marriage is legally registered in your home country and that you have proof of that. Passports is another thing. Sometimes we see backlogs at the passport offices internationally. So, ultimately you're going to need a passport to travel to Canada. So get your passports applied for. There's all sorts of requirements that immigration will have basically to show that you meet the eligibility criteria of the program and admissibility. So just making sure all your ducks are in a row from a document perspective is going to make any future application go much more smoothly.
And especially if it's a first come, first serve application process, sometimes we don't, we hope for some notice in terms of exactly what the criteria will be. But we have seen situations in the past where we're given notice, the day before a program or a pilot launches. And if you don't have everything ready to go, you may not get in before the quota fills up. So good idea to start dealing with all of these things right now. And that way, as soon as we know when the program is launching and what the specific criteria will be, hopefully you will have, as Claire said, all your ducks in a row and be in a really good position to submit your application as soon as the program opens.
Yeah, and then I guess kind of looking for your job, that's a really obviously critical piece of this program, is finding a genuine job offer in Canada. So we know a little bit about the type of job that immigration wants you to have. It has to be a home care or home support worker program. And those are not positions that they're not primarily like cooking or cleaning based roles. They are providing care to individuals who require it. So that's going to be a big thing to keep in mind if you're looking for roles with employers in Canada. It has to be a caregiving position. Immigration likely will ask questions about, the passage of time from the time that you filed until, they get around to reviewing the application. So is there a genuine need for care is something that, even if you're looking for an employer in Canada, you need to ask yourself that as well, because it certainly serves no purpose to file an application with a job offer that may not exist in, a year or two once the application is reviewed.
Okay, so we have a few questions that have popped up in the chat group. I'll just go through some of those. So one question is about which IELTS is required for the caregiver application, academic or general. In the past, all immigration programs require the general training IELTS exam. If you're writing the IELTS, CELPIP as well as the general version. If you write the academic, it will not be accepted for immigration. So make sure that you are signing up for the correct version. And when will the new program open? We don't know yet, but likely you're looking at late 2024 or early 2025. Okay, what else do we have here? Okay, what is the exact job responsibility of a caregiver? That's an excellent question. So in Canada, with all of these programs, we have the National Occupational Classification for every position that you can get in Canada. And what that National Occupational Classification does is if you look up the position that's being offered to you, so whether it's a child care position or a home support worker, there will actually be what's called a lead statement, giving kind of a general overview of what that position is, and then a detailed description of job duties that you can expect to see in that role. So you want to make sure that the position being offered to you aligns with one of the NOCs that are included under the program.
And probably our last question, what is considered a dependent family member? And that is defined by immigration as the applicant's spouse or common law or conjugal partner, as well as any dependent child under 22 years old. And that can be a biological or an adopted child, subject to some considerations there. So generally, spouse and children under 22 can be included on these applications.
And, if I'm seeing a lot of questions still popping up, if we didn't have a chance to get to your question today, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to schedule a consultation with you and kind of go through in a little bit more detail some of your specific questions, and, give you as much background info as we can on the program, and then, put you on a list to kind of update you whenever the program does launch.
So thank you so much, Lee and Claire. So that's all the time we have for our webinar today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and also a big special thank you to Lee and Claire for sharing their expert knowledge with us. As Lee said, if you'd like to discuss today's topics in more detail, or if you have a question that we didn't get to, please reach out to book consultation. Details can be found on the screen right now. I also saw a question about if a recording of the webinar will be available. Yes, this webinar was recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel and will also be posted on our website under the heading Media Room. So please go there if you're looking for a copy of it. I also encourage everyone to sign up for our alerts and to follow us on social media to stay up to date with the latest developments in Canadian immigration. Thank you all for tuning in again and take care. Bye.